Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video. Today I've got a blade that is exceptional as far as I'm concerned. This is the Reate Knives Valkyrie 2. The Valkyrie 2, the main difference is the carbon fiber scale instead of the full titanium handle. Now, this knife is one that I will, let me say something by way of introduction so you kind of know where I'm coming from. I was not wildly impressed by this knife. I wasn't, aggressively out there trying to find one and buy one. I was aware of it, I'd seen a couple of videos, but it wasn't something that I was, that I'd even had on my, need to buy list. I was offered it in a trade, and I was even a little hesitant at that time, but I was like, yeah, you know what, let me try it out. I've heard good things, so sure. Well, I get this knife in hand, and first off, it feels lighter than you think it should. It's a pretty hefty looking knife. It's got fairly thick blade stock, fairly thick handle scales, and then you pick it up and you're like, well, that's lighter than it should be. Not only that, but everything is just done well, right? It flips well, it carries well, it cuts well, it feels comfortable in hand. It just does everything right, okay? Now let me say, I know the look is a little different, a little artistic, and in that sense, I'm sure that some people are gonna be like, yeah, it just doesn't do that much for me. And I was in that camp until I got this in hand and started to sort of mess with it. And then I was like, wow, why was I not doing everything I could to get my hands on one of these? It is so impressive. Okay, so that's sort of how my take on this knife has developed over time. And I actually waited, the first few days of getting this and handling it, I was so impressed. I'm like, okay, I can't make any kind of objective review right now, so I'm gonna wait a while. And so I've had this for quite some time, kind of wanting the excitement to wear off, and I suppose it has a little bit, but this is still an amazing knife, way beyond what I expected it to be when I took it in a trade. So this was a Fort Henry Custom Knives exclusive. It was designed by Faisal Yamin, and of course built by Reate Knives. And I want to say that was true of the first one. I think maybe the Valkyrie 2 was a little more widely distributed. At least if you go on a lot of retailers' websites, they'll have a listing for it. Now they're all sold out. And that's the other thing. These are a little tough to get your hands on. If you get an opportunity, this is a knife that I think most people will really, really appreciate. Now I know it's in a price point that not everyone is into, but for that price point, let me say this right off the bat. This is a knife that does what you expect a high-end production knife to do, okay? And I've had this, and I'm sure you have as well. You buy what's a pretty expensive knife with very high expectations, okay? Because, those high dollars bring high expectations. And you're a little disappointed, okay? This is not that knife. This thing actually was beyond my expectations. It is phenomenal. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the details, and I'll talk about exactly why that's the case. So size and weight on this, nice big knife. You guys know I'm into larger stuff. So this is 8 and 11/16 overall, so just a little more than 5/8 of an inch, or a little more than 8 5/8. 3 and 13/16 inch blade. So that's again a little more than 3 3/4. 4 and 7/8 inch handle. Okay, so just under 5 inches and just under 5 ounces. So the weight on this is really, really impressive. And the best way that I can think of to describe this is a knife that, as I said, you pick it up and it feels lighter than it should. And if you remember in my review of this knife, I said the same thing. Both of these have full carbon fiber scale, and they both, you pick them up with an expectation based on the size, based on the build. You go, I have an idea of how much this should weigh. And then you pick it up and it's like, whoa, what happened here? So very, very impressive for size and weight. Carries really, really well. I know we're not to the handle yet, but let me say this pocket clip functions exceptionally well. I've carried this knife quite a bit. In fact, at this point, it's almost hard not to carry it. And it just is absolutely outstanding as a carry knife. Now let me give you two quick comparisons that sort of put me in. Obviously, the Torrent is just a little bit smaller, but weighs more. And that's where, my expectations for weight, come from other tie frame locks that I have. And so this knife weighs, about an ounce more than this one, even though you're not really, in fact, there's less cutting edge, and I want to say a little less overall size as well. Okay. Another example of a tie frame lock that's fairly beefy is, of course, the 0560. And this knife, again, weighs way less. When you feel this knife, you look at this knife and go, yeah, they should weigh about the same. But then you lift this up and you're like, my goodness. So very, very impressive on size and weight. Okay, so that's the first thing that I want to say. And that's where I wanted to bring in some of those comparisons to give you an idea. And I think the closest comparison would be the 804, where you just pick it up and go, wait a second, something doesn't feel right about this. It's too light. Another not bad example was the S571 from Real Steel. And again, this one is heavily milled out. So it's even maybe mortised, even because you think, well, solid titanium, it's going to weigh a little bit more than usual, but then it's actually quite lightweight. Not as lightweight as this, which is 4.9 ounces. So very, very impressive on that. Let's go ahead and start talking about this blade. Now, it is a different style of blade, okay? So I understand that there's going to be a matter of subjectiveness here, of personal taste. And to me, initially, I will say I was sort of on the fence about this. As I've had the knife and used it and had it in hand, it becomes more and more appealing, okay? Even the handle shape, all right, it's sort of that whole Persian style clip point blade, like the Cold Steel Espada, right? And let me zoom in here now so we can get a closer look at the blade and some of the other details on this. There we go. So you've got this sort of Persian style clip point blade, nice little thumb rest here and thumb ramp, which is really neat. It gives you the chance to, you can hold it in sort of a typical saber grip, or you can choke up and have that thumb rest for some finer detailed cutting. Really, really like that. So M390 steel, and this has held an edge for me really well. I've actually, as I've said, this has been a hard knife for me not to want to carry, and so I've had this with me and done a fair bit of cutting with it. And I've only stropped it. I have not actually sharpened this yet, just because it doesn't need it. It's still razor sharp. And M390 is very, very good for that. Just a very wear resistant steel. Love the fuller here. It goes the full length of the blade. And I think it's kind of different to see it come right out and terminate at the end here. But it does fit well with the overall style of the knife. Nice stonewash on this. And it's sort of a medium stonewash, I would say. It's the kind of finish that is going to allow a lot of wear without showing, but still looks really nice. Like, it's not so stonewash that it sort of mutes out the blade. Okay, so really nicely done. All of the edges here are very clean and chamfered. You've got this big belly, and I've got to say the performance on this blade is very, very good. It's obviously quite pointy. You've got tons of belly here, which means it slices like crazy. And so as just an everyday carry, cutting blade, it's very, very good. Of course, this blade shape, it's hard to look at it and not think, that's going to be a fairly proficient defensive or even offensive blade, and there's no question about that. Now, the knife is a little too fine. I wouldn't recommend, if you're a soldier or something, that this would be a knife you'd want to carry. But if you're someone, a police officer, something like that, where you can carry something nice and not expect to destroy it too much, this would obviously be a knife that would function very well. It certainly has that sort of combat, tactical, fighting knife feel and look to it, fairly aggressive looking blade. Now, that may be something that you'd want to think about. If you pull this out in public, people might be like, whoa, okay, because it is a very upswept, sort of aggressive looking blade design. But if they see the overall knife, and if you share with them a little bit about the design and the quality, I think people would appreciate the fact that there's an artistic element here, and that's why it's got that particular design. So gorgeous, gorgeous blade, very, very functional, and I'm super happy with that. Let's move on to the next thing we want to talk about, which is lockup and deployment. Now I've got a couple of examples here to kind of show you what I'm talking about with lockup and deployment, but let me say this, all right? This knife is really, really good. It's smooth as silk. It flips like crazy. You know, the detent is just the way it should be. The geometry, the relationship between the flipper and the pivot is perfect so that this knife fires fast and hard, and yet it's still extremely smooth, and it doesn't just, you know, let me get the 560 here for a second. Notice how on this knife it is smooth, but it's a total free dropper, okay? Now it's still solid as a rock, it's pretty impressive, but it just, if I let go of it with my finger, it just drops closed, okay? Then compared to this, where instead of just dropping, it's just smooth, okay? So this is one of those knives where it's just done right, okay? Again, I said when you spend the kind of money that this costs, you have an expectation, and this really lives up to that expectation in every possible way. And you expect a knife at this price point to feel just the way this one feels, okay? Very, very well done on lockup and deployment. It is a multi-row bearing system. It does have the lock bar insert, and as is typical for Reate knives, it's kind of hidden. There is the screw here, but if you look at the front, the titanium actually comes and wraps around, so that only by looking in the knife can you actually see the little piece of stainless steel that interfaces there with the blade tang. Okay, so really well done. It does have, of course, an over travel stop. You probably won't be able to see that. The lighting would have to be sort of just perfect, but it's there. You'll have to, right where my finger is now, that it does extend back there behind the rest of the handle. So really well done. Oh, blade stop is partially, and I've said before that I like this. You can see how there's a round cutout here in the back of the blade that wraps around that blade stop. Okay. One other comment, and that is this does not do the thing that you've heard the Apostle complain about, where you unlock the knife and now it's already past the detent. Okay, so that's pretty cool. One little nitpick I could make, you can see the detent hole just coming a little bit above the handle there. All right, not the end of the world. And in fact, it's not the whole detent. It's not, okay, that's not going to sound right, but the whole spot there is not visible. The whole hole, okay, is not visible. Just sort of half of it peaks a little bit above the top of the handle here. So lockup and deployment is absolutely impressive. And by the way, that's pretty typical. Now, let me say this. If you've got a torrent, or if you've felt one before, the lockup on the torrent is a little, I mean, the detent on the torrent is a little stiffer. Okay, it breaks a little differently. Both are very clean, both are very fast. What's impressive about the Valkyrie is how comfortable it is. Like, it's not, this is a knife you could flip for hours and never feel uncomfortable. You know, just, you wouldn't get that finger wear that you get on certain knives. And certainly the Torrent is a knife that would wear out your fingers, and has worn out mine many, many times. Okay, not that I don't love this knife, it's absolutely amazing. But stiffer detent. Same with the 804. Just a little bit of a stiffer detent than the Valkyrie. And what's cool is the Valkyrie is well done enough that it can have that slightly lighter detent, but still fire. In fact, it fires as hard as, and maybe even a little harder than those other two that I was showing you. There's actually some recoil in that blade. It kicks your hand back a little bit when you fire it, which is really, really cool. Now, moving on to the handle. We've talked about lockup and deployment. We've talked about the blade. Let's talk about the handle. There are some details here that are definitely worth checking out. Notice the very, very cool milling. You've got sort of this fishbone sort of milling on the titanium and the carbon fiber. Gorgeous line that continues from that fuller on the blade and runs right through the knife. Does look very, very cool. Jimping here on the back and jimping here, both are just perfect, right? They're not so sharp that they wear you out, but if I push down here, it does lock my thumb in really, really well. And the back, that sort of pistol grip shape, does lock right into your palm. So in a sort of a combat situation, this is a knife that has very, very positive grip. And even in a hard working situation, you know, where you're doing a multiple cutting tasks or prolonged use, you're not going to get any hot spots at all. In a reverse grip, it's also extremely comfortable, very, very naturally fits into that. And of course, that blade shape with the belly and the sort of hook point there does lend itself to a reverse grip as well. Okay, so ergonomics on this are, again, exactly what you'd want. I keep saying this, but I feel like this is a knife that has become a real standard for me, where you go, like, when you spend that amount of money on a knife, this is what you're expecting, and it does not disappoint in any area. Everything is just really, really well done. Milled titanium clip, which works very well. Again, now I've got to comment on this just a little bit. I've got a few knives here where the clip is a milled clip. Okay, let me Custom Knife Factory Sequoia, Valkyrie, what else? The 804, the S571 from Real Steel, and even the other Reate with the Todd bag ceramic ball. All of these clips work really well, and so I know that oftentimes there'll be a discussion about the fact that milled clips don't work as well as spring clips. All of these that I've shown you do work as well as any spring clip I've had. And let me say this then, if you do get a milled clip that doesn't work well, there's no real excuse for that, because all of these clips have been able to carry it off. And so if you do get a milled clip that doesn't work that well, then, you know, it's really not, you really can't blame the milled clip. It's just a poorly designed milled clip, okay? I should do a bit offer this as a bit of a comparison. Here's a knife that, let me zoom out a little bit, has similar materials, similar sort of, these two just remind me of each other, you know, the detailed milling, the carbon fiber, the titanium. Obviously they're very different, but the other thing is both of these are fairly artistic knives. Both of these are going to appeal to someone who wants something that's kind of cool and kind of different than your standard sort of run-of-the-mill blade shape. All right, that's pretty well everything that I wanted to cover on this. There we go. Let me come back out here. Overall impressions on this knife, I think at this point you probably know I'm really, really impressed. Okay, and I will say this is a knife that, you know, it didn't even start out on my list. This was not a knife I was trying to buy, but since I've had it and been carrying it and using it, it is extremely good. This for me has become a real standard. So that, you know, this is one of the things I'm going to look at and say, when you spend that much money on a knife, this is the kind of thing you should be getting. You should be getting a knife that actuates as comfortably and easily as this one, that carries in pocket as comfortably and easily as this one, that feels as good in hand as this feels, that cuts as well as this cuts, that has edge retention as good as this. You know, this is a real standard for me in terms of what a high-end production knife should be. So there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you get a chance to check one of these out, do not miss it. It's extremely, extremely impressive. All right, hope you enjoyed the video, and we will talk to you soon.